Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Cirtwill, President and CEO of Northern Policy Institute. NPI is focused on finding and defining good public policy for and from Northern Ontario. As an independent, evidence-driven institution with a focus on building capacity in Northern Ontario, Statcam is a critical resource for us and for our work. That's why today's chat with the Chief Statistician is such an exciting opportunity for me and my colleagues. We hope it's exciting for you as well. Before we begin, I just want to mention that I'm joining you today from Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay is in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory, and the land is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Fort William First Nation. Because, of course, we are virtual, I can actually welcome the Chief Statistician to every region of Northern Ontario. He'll be speaking today to an area that includes 118 First Nation reserves or settlements, 6 Métis Nation regional reserves, regional areas, 144 municipalities, and 16 unorganized census subdivisions. One of our favorite topics of conversation in Northern Policy's offices. I want to honor and thank all of those who have cared for this land for thousands of years and hope that together we can care for it for thousands more. As this is our first public event in some months, I do want to take a moment and consider the latest news from the ongoing residential school tragedy. 215 unmarked graves. No child should be buried far from home, and certainly no child should be buried unmarked and unknown. NPI has created a resource on our website for those who want to learn more about the tragedy that was and is residential schools in Canada. For survivors and their families, there are also resources to help you cope with this latest reminder of the horror and the harm. Join me in just a moment of silence. Now, getting back to the work at hand today, we will have 3 sort of focus sessions. Each will be followed by a Q&A. Please make use of the Q&A function in order to send in your questions. We will try to get as many answers as possible today. But first, before we move into the remarks from the Chief Statistician, let's talk about size. At 800,000 kilometers squared, Northern Ontario is bigger than 7 provinces, 8 if you count the rest of Ontario. Only Quebec, British Columbia, and the 3 territories are physically bigger than the combined regions of Northern Ontario. At 800,000 people, the regions that make up Northern Ontario are, population-wise, bigger than 3 provinces and comparable to 3 more. Despite our size, and frankly because of it, good data about Northern Ontario is very hard to come by. I say despite because if Northern Ontario was a province, even statistically, we would know a great deal more about it as a whole and about its constituent parts. I say because, since given our huge geography, our population is very dispersed, making it hard to collect and release good information and without violating privacy concerns for the people answering the census and other Statcam surveys. These are the types of things that we're hoping to talk over today with Anil Arora, the Chief Statistician for Stats Canada. Mr. Arora, as he made a point of telling me, is from Edmonton, not Ottawa. Don't know what prompted that, perhaps my trademark disparaging remarks about the perspectives of Ottawa in terms of dealing with issues for Northern Ontario. Maybe not. He joined Statcam for the 2nd time, by the way, in September 2016 when he was appointed as Chief Statistician of Canada. He has had a long career full of impressive awards and the leadership of key changes and innovations, including the introduction of an online census questionnaire. More to the point for those of us living in Northern Ontario, in 2010, Mr. Arora joined Natural Resources Canada as Assistant Deputy Minister of the Minerals and Metals sector, which means that he might actually know a few things about the regions in which we live and the economies in which we operate. On that note, I will turn the floor over to Anil to offer some remarks.
Thank you very much, Charles. Merci beaucoup. I'd also like to start by beginning with an acknowledgement that I am speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe First Nation, who were the first people to walk the lands on which the nation's capital is located on today. On behalf of Statistics Canada, I want to also express our deepest sorrow for the First Nations and all those directly and indirectly affected by the disturbing discovery of 215 children buried at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. And we share in their grief and we mourn the loss of so many young lives. This tragedy is a moment of truth for all the people of Canada. It reminds us that the traumatic events of the past are not history. The legacy of those events is still with us today. And at this dark and chilling moment of reckoning, we acknowledge the pain and suffering that continues to be perpetuated through the generations. I invite you over the course of National Indigenous History Month to reflect on ways for all of us to work in a spirit of respect, collaboration, and trust with survivors, the families of those lost, and all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. It's at moments like these that we at Statistics Canada recommit ourselves to earning the trust of Canadians by using data for the public good and to advance the cause of reconciliation with Indigenous people, specifically through our work on disaggregated data, which I'll get into a little bit more detail later. I'm here today to share what we at Statistics Canada have discovered about the different communities all around Northern Ontario. As Charles mentioned, a very, very important region of our country. You are truly the backbone of this country, growing our food and managing our natural resources, as well as the natural environment. Let me start by telling you a story in numbers about the impact of COVID-19 on Northern Ontario. You can read about these trends in more detail in the information package that's being distributed after this presentation today. So let me start with health impacts. Despite the fact that vaccines have arrived and the pandemic clearly isn't over yet, I know there's been an alarming spike in COVID cases in Timmins and Fort Albany, in First Nations, Attawapiskat, First Nation, and the town of Moosonee lately, with each community declaring a state of emergency in response. And our thoughts are with everyone there as they struggle through what could be another difficult period. The vaccination rate for all of Northern Ontario is at 68%, and second doses are being rushed in to help get ahead of this variant, the variants, and mitigate the severity of suffering in the province. Over the past year, the pandemic has had an unprecedented effect on economic and labor activity in all regions of the country, stemming largely from the initial restrictions enacted last spring, which shuttered large amounts of businesses right from coast to coast. And as we cope with the challenges of the pandemic's second and third waves, these impacts are becoming more regional in nature, a reflection of the vastness of this country and its diverse population. Northern Ontario has not been hit as hard by the pandemic as in my home province, Alberta. For example, all Canadian households and businesses have shown great resilience in adapting to the pandemic's social realities. In Northern Ontario, we've seen business activity bounce back faster than in the rest of the province after an initial shock during the early weeks of last spring's shutdown. In last May, Thunder Bay was hit hardest with 13% of businesses shuttered compared to 5% in Greater Sudbury. A year later, business activity has rebounded, led by Elliott Lake, with only a 2% net drop in active businesses, which matches the national average. And that's followed closely by Greater Sudbury, North Bay, and Thunder Bay, all doing better than Ontario as a whole, which is still struggling with a 5% decline due to extended lockdowns in Greater Toronto. But staying open is not the same as staying profitable, as you all know. Nearly twice as many businesses in Northern Ontario experienced a significant revenue shortfall in 2020 compared to the rest of the province. Almost 4 in 10 businesses in Northern Ontario saw revenues drop by 40% or more from the year before. Provincially and nationally, around 2 in 10 businesses suffered the same fate. And that story is changing. And this year, businesses are increasingly optimistic about their prospects. In the first few months, less than a third of businesses in Northern Ontario expected to continue operating at their current levels of revenue and expenditures for at least a year before considering closure or bankruptcy. And that number more than doubled this quarter as restrictions loosen and the end of the pandemic hopefully is in sight. It's still slightly lower than the provincial and national averages, but it's a big shift and, more importantly, in the right direction. Business challenges are often accompanied by employment challenges, and Northern Ontario has experienced more than its fair share of both. Total employment in Ontario has recovered 10% since last May, but it's only recovered 4% in the northern regions. And looking more closely, however, and you'll see sharp variations in employment by sector. In line with national trends, the accommodation and food sector in Northern Ontario was hit particularly hard, with employment falling significantly during the initial lockdown. As of this May, employment in the sector has rebounded by 40% year over year. However, the mining sector, as Charles mentioned, had a stint there when I was with NRCan, and I've had the pleasure of visiting many of the communities in Northern Ontario in that capacity, saw a 10% jump in employment between 2019 and 2020, thanks to the opening of a number of new mines. There are now new training programs geared towards encouraging more young people from Indigenous communities to work in this sector. Although the salaries of Indigenous people working in mining jobs are higher than the average for all Canadian workers, our data still show that they make 5 to 10% less on the dollar than their non-Indigenous counterparts working in Ontario's different mining activities. And hopefully these programs will help resolve that wage gap. The people of Northern Ontario are coping with all these ups and downs admirably. The stability is evident even in your population count, which has remained roughly the same, about 800,000 people, as Charles mentioned in the opening, since the turn of the century. If you look a little closer, though, Northern Ontario's population has actually been inching upwards in the past 5 years, and after more than 10 years of consecutive declines. And that growth is mostly, no surprise, due to international immigration, as Northern Ontario records more deaths than births due to having more seniors than Southern Ontario and more youth leaving for other parts of the country. And yet, over the last 3 years, more people have moved from Southern to Northern Ontario, especially from the Golden Horseshoe, than moved in the other direction, which has helped to offset other population losses. Greater Sudbury has enjoyed the biggest bump in population lately. And while the median age of Northern Ontarians is older than the province as a whole, some areas are home to quite young populations. Northern Ontario has more children under 14 than the rest of the province, thanks to the blessings of many Indigenous people in this area. 1 in 6 Northern Ontarians identify as Indigenous, according to the last census, and across the province, fewer than 1 in 40 do so. Now, you may have heard about the pandemic and how it's caused housing prices to rise all across Canada. And our data showed that trend playing out in interesting ways in different areas of this country. The average price of a new home in Greater Sudbury has increased by 15% during the pandemic, with growth rates rapidly accelerating in the new year. The growth outpaces the rest of Ontario by 4% and Canada by 5%. According to MLS data, the average single-family home in North Bay now costs 1.5 times as much as it did before the pandemic. That's more than $100,000 added to the price tag. Even the heated Greater Ontario housing market has only gone up by a quarter in the same period. Obviously, differences in absolute pricing. These increases are liable to put pressure on housing affordability, so we're monitoring this trend closely. For those interested in buying a home, Statistics Canada now has a tool called the Proximity Measures Data Viewer. It can be used to explore different areas by census subdivision and see a score that measures a home's proximity to grocery stores, childcare, schools, and neighborhood parks. The last chapter in this data-driven story that I want to highlight today is about mental health. Our community health survey last fall showed us that while the pandemic has taken a toll across all provinces, with nearly 1/3 of respondents reporting that their mental health has declined since COVID-19 hit, the majority of Northern Ontarians aged 12 and up told us that they remain resilient despite this pandemic's challenges to their mental and emotional well-being. About 1 in 10 respondents found the opposite, that their mental health actually improved in this last year, slightly fewer Northern Ontarians reporting that result. However, more than half of all our respondents said that their mental health has essentially stayed the same. And that number was even higher among Northern Ontarians, which is a further testament to the stability of the people in these regions. In conclusion, Northern Ontarians, Northern Ontario, like all regions of the country, has experienced extremely difficult challenges over this past year. Some communities are facing new challenges to their health and well-being, and our data attest to the resolve of Northern Ontarians, which provides them with a very strong foundation going forward as vaccination rates continue to rise and restrictions on social and economic life ease. COVID-19's long-term impact on how Canadians live and work remain difficult to judge at this stage. In the near future, the legacies of the pandemic will be housing affordability and challenges related to mental health. And these issues are also intensifying in other regions right across this country. We at Statistics Canada will, of course, continue to track these trends and provide as much helpful data and analysis as we can to support your way forward. I thank you, and I turn it back to Charles for some discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anil. I thought that was really helpful. It's always great to hear the folks at Statcam be able to break down the various regions of Northern Ontario and give us actual hard numbers. I'm sure that the mayor of North Bay, Al McDonald, is absolutely ecstatic over the price increases for housing in his community, suggesting that all of the efforts that he and his team have been putting in to grow that community is worthwhile. That being said, if I was buying a house in North Bay, I'm not sure I'd be that enthusiastic, but everything's relative. I'll remind everybody who's watching that the way you submit your questions is through the Q&A. And of course, while you gather your thoughts and decide what to ask, they've been kind enough to provide me with a couple of questions. Well, I provided one and they provided another. So let's start with that. I'm interested, Anil, in can you tell us a little bit about how StatsCan played a role in targeting the response to COVID? Because I know you switched a lot of gears early on.
Well, thanks for that question, Charles. First of all, we embarked on a modernization agenda about 3.5-4 years ago, where we said, look, we need to be far more user-centric. We need to use new ways, new methods, new technologies. We need to build numeracy and literacy skills. We need to have a modern workforce and a modern workplace. So we invested in a number of technologies and a number of ways of doing things. But most importantly was a change of mind, I would say, and a change of outlook. And so when the pandemic hit, of course, none of us foresaw this unfortunate series of events. We were prepared, and I think it was, we accelerated a number of efforts, but our philosophy was simply, how can we be helpful? And so I think, we're, as you can see, more and more data-driven societies, more and more data-driven economies and so on, are starting to see the value, the inherent value of data and good data management. And so, our simple philosophy was, okay, what can we do to help during this stage? So, we weren't afraid to paint outside the numbers in a sense. We worked with colleagues right across levels of government in the private sector, in NGOs, different parts of this country. And we said, how can we be of help? And I think from there came a number of really, interesting opportunities for us to be impactful. For example, we knew that the system was struggling with personal protective equipment inventories, and so data management, finding surveys to see what that demand and supply curve was looking like. Some of our experts in data modeling and extrapolation and so on, and we jumped right in there, and I think we helped the system to say, okay, how can we do a better job of knowing that we've got that precious supply of PPEs. Another example is the offer to do contact tracing. We have thousands of interviewers, many of them in Northern Ontario, we just said, okay, how can we step up? And it's really, really gratifying. Our amazing interviewers, working remotely, and we have to, just like every other organization, have to kind of overnight, working from our homes and virtually and so on. But we just did over close to 1.7 million calls. We reached out to provinces, we reached out to health authorities, and we said, look, if we can be of any help, let us know. And that's on top of tools like geospatial explorers and providing the kind of demographics, pre-existing conditions at a touch of a button, a COVID-19 dashboard to see how the economy was changing, the kind of partnerships with like the chambers of commerce and so on. And so, a lot of gratitude to our staff, very, very innovative and looking ideas. And of course, we changed the culture to say, we're not going to stand in the way, or we're not going to stop those. How can we help? Because that's what Canadians need. And I think that's been really, really helpful. And the second thanks is, of course, to Canadians, businesses, and Canadian citizens, and right across this country, who said, yeah, I think data is really important. Statcam's trying to help us understand what's going on in our society and our economy. Let's participate. And so I think those ideas, that simple philosophy of being helpful, supportive Canadians and Canadian businesses, I think has allowed us to give a lot back to Canadians.
Great. You actually mentioned the Chambers of Commerce there as a potential partner, and as a data person, I have to say one of the things that Statcam did early on that really caught me and a bunch of others quite by surprise is you crowdsourced a survey. I think the first time ever in the history of Statcam. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but can you tell me what led to that experiment, the partnership with the Canadian Chamber and the Canadian exporters, and how did it go?
Well, thanks again, Charles. In fact, we had done some crowdsourcing when just before cannabis was being considered to be legalized. We had to get at a sense of sort of what was that illegal price and consumption, and how often people were buying it in the illegal market, and clearly that at that time that didn't lend itself to our traditional survey approach. So we crowdsourced it, and amazingly enough, we got some really, really strong responses. And so we, as I was telling you a little bit about that modernization effort, we did a number of these Pathfinder projects, and one of them was to crowdsource. So we built on that experience. And as you mentioned, many other experiences that, experiments and so on, like looking at wastewater and seeing, what was the amount of chemicals in there, cannabis residues to opioids to, other materials. And so again, that's another example that we took into this period now. But coming back to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, we launched this, the Canadian Survey of Business Conditions in partnership with them. And we said, look, what do you need during this time? And that partnership has been and continues to be a very, very important one. And it allowed the chamber, but it allowed all of Canada and the government of Canada to get a sense of sort of what were businesses feeling like in terms of their ability to continue. Where were some of the challenges at that time? And we've been monitoring that change over time. And crowdsourcing has been a way to do it. Now, in addition to crowdsourcing, we know that there are some statistical, methodological challenges with crowdsourcing, but it still gives us a good indication, especially as we're seeing, trends change over time. But we also put together some, very robust panel surveys that have been giving us representative data on a high frequency as well. We've been doing things like flash estimates, where we get a good representative sample of the key industries that are moving the economy, whether it's in trade or the overall GDP. And so those flash estimates have been also very, very helpful to policymakers at different levels of government, as well as businesses, to make the kind of decisions that are needed. So it's a simple philosophy. Sometimes you have to be good enough, not absolutely precise and absolutely late. Sometimes you have to be good enough and provide the kind of information that is needed, so that businesses have the kind of resources to stay afloat. And I think they were able to use that information to walk the government through what businesses were going through and continue to go through during this difficult time.
Marvelous. So they're feeding me one question on this chain, but I'm going to cheat over here because I'm going to show my bias and go to Ignace, which is one of my favorite places, not just because my wife was raised there. But Penny Lucas asks about stats about Northern Ontario, highlighting, of course, that North Bay, while considered north to Toronto, was still quite a way east and south of Northwestern Ontario. And she's asking, do you have the same kind of stats for Northwestern Ontario, where they are not only not really north, but they're more rural and remote? And how do they compare? And I like this question because it's going to lead into our future discussions later in this session.
Well, thank you for that question. Really, really appreciate it. First of all, we do have information, so it's not like we have the just data deserts. We do have the census that is which, as you know, if you haven't filled out your form, please do so. It's not too late. That is a very a robust instrument that gets at labor market situation. It gets at various socioeconomic factors that are changing in very small neighborhoods and very small. I mean, right down to very, very precise levels. The challenge is that many of our other surveys don't have the kind of sample sizes that, as you said right at the beginning, Charles, that don't allow us to be able to give robust estimates, or if there's one employer traditionally in that particular area, you reveal incomes and you basically have given the payroll for that company, kind of thing. So there are not only privacy concerns, but there's also confidentiality concerns that we have to be mindful of. Now, having said that, that's not we throw our hands up and we give up. Not at all. As I said, our modernization effort is to be more creative and to work in partnership and to try and look at new sources and administrative and other sources of data to try and get at what's really happening. So we have to prioritize what are the most pressing needs. What is the frequency at which we need that data? Identify sources of data that fit that need, and then we do have other techniques where we have been over the last several years. It's a concerted effort to say how do we remove those X's in all our tables where there's no data or it's too small to represent, and how can we put decent data that still give you a good idea of what's going on. And we're looking at things like small area estimations. And so we have to find that right balance between, not divulging somebody's privacy or confidentiality and still providing good information at a frequency that makes sense. So it's going to take some partnerships. It is something that we're doing currently, by the way. So we absolutely have plans to fill some of the voids and gaps that are present. So we understand that there are many parts of Northern Ontario where we don't have the same frequency of data as we do in other parts of the province. But you know what? I think we can do it. And it's as I say, data is a team sport. So let's work together to figure out what are the pressing needs. Let's identify the sources of data, and we can be creative and say, okay, how can we get at some of those gaps that are in there?
Great. I look forward to working with Statcam on that particular issue for Ignace and other communities. Here's a question from Conrad. Conrad says, you touched on vaccination rates in Northern versus Southern Ontario. What else can you tell us about inequities when it comes to access and delivery of healthcare services across the province?
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, excellent question. There's no question that, the infrastructure that's available in this country varies quite a bit, right? I mean, there are parts of this country that have a disproportionate number of beds for, the population as in other parts of the country. I mean, like as you mentioned, the sparsity of the population, the distances that are involved, and I think there's a recognition that we need to address some of these inequities. So, so the inequities of built infrastructure, where is it that people can get access to services, even just things like, proximity to transit and getting to a hospital, for example, availability of doctors, and so on. So these are metrics that I think are really, really important in general, and I am generalizing here. What we found is, through this pandemic, it's highlighted the fact that when you have these inequities, the impact of the economic and social aspects of our lives, it doesn't hit everybody the same. So we know that economically and health-wise and so on, it is a factor of the postal code that you live in, or what is your ethnic makeup, for example. So we know, the types of jobs, the kind of vulnerabilities, the kind of access to to that infrastructure that's there. And I think, looking forward, it's that integration of the data, I think, that is really, really important. So whether it's how do you put that in a geospatial frame so that you can start to see and that's where I was, we've done some interesting work on these indices that, take numbers of impacts and then show the differential, impacts of the virus on, various subpopulations or sectors of our economy. And that's because you can now start to look at the social data, the economic data, and more, I would say in the future, the environmental data as well. So again, Statistics Canada wants to create that environment where, even though we may not have all the data, many other, in a sense, donors of data can bring a particular aspect, and say, look, when you correlate this with this factor, look at the interesting, trends, and look at those kinds of issues. I think that's the future, if you like, of policy making. It's about saying, okay, how do we target our energies and our precious resources on things that will have those kind of positive outcomes? So at the inception of a program, how do we take those kinds of things into account so that we don't pay an inordinate price, for inequities after the fact? And how do we build it in? Now, last point I'll make there is that you can't just kind of take data from anywhere and just mash it and pretend that it's just going to give us golden insights. I think standards are really going to be important. Definitions are going to be important. So again, it comes back to having good data strategies, good standards, so that we build the data set in such a way that we can build it so that it's going to triangulate or it's going to correlate with other sources, so that we can make meaning of it. Because the last thing you want to do is you think you got the right answer and then go ahead and make decisions. And as this pandemic has shown, those decisions really, really count. Lives and livelihoods are intertwined. So things that you don't always find perhaps the most sexy, if you like standards and cohesion and interoperability. Well, guess what? We have to pay attention to those things because this last year and a half has shown us that they matter, and they matter a lot. So thank you for that question.
So they're urging me to move on, but I'm going to ask you one more question because I've got, like, what are they going to do? Shut me off? I don't know. So anyway, the reason I'm going to move to a question is this: you're talking about health services and health delivery. The last time I looked at the data around healthcare, we were looking at roughly about 4% of the provincial spend on healthcare being spent in Northern Ontario, and we're only about 2% of the population. And so it's really interesting to kind of see how that plays out on the ground in terms of division of delivery and services and that type of thing. And so I'm pretty excited to see COVID having an impact where you're getting that healthcare data on the ground, and Statcam is able to kind of break it down by those populations. We were consistently ahead both in the far north and in many of our northwestern communities around that vaccination rate. I think that's something interesting to look at health policy going forward, that we can, if we want to, as a province, meet the needs of these communities in a very aggressive and forward way. And of course, there's lots of sub-communities. And so the last question I'll highlight in this section, and I know we're running long, but we'll survive. Patrick Timoney asks a question. He says, what is Stats Canada doing to explore the realities of official language minority groups? Northeastern Ontario has the largest proportion of Francophones in Ontario, yet it's very difficult to find data on this group. Do you have a sense of how the pandemic has impacted Francophone Northern Ontarians?
First of all, yes, we do have, obviously good data from our censuses and a number of other surveys on, minority language populations and how they're distributed in various parts of the country. And of course, there are some very vibrant communities in Northern Ontario, Franco-Ontarian communities, etc. So we know the base information, and of course, as you start to now look at the health data and you look at as we just discussed, many other data points, you start to see the differential impacts on different minority language speaking populations. And so, but that's not enough. We know that we've got to go further. So if you, for example, look at this census on the short form, there's a whole series of questions on trying to get at a much better disaggregation of minority language populations and rights and minority language rights and so on. So we are actually making some very significant investments and moves in trying to even get at better data on official language minorities right across this country. Now, they're, in many cases, they're very small populations. That's they're minority populations in many cases. So that's why you need instruments like the census to try and get at that baseline, population number. And then through linkages of other data sources, you can start to correlate the differential socioeconomic impacts on those populations. So there are also post-census surveys that are done that go into different aspects of how minority language communities are faring. So stay tuned for some of that investment. And then I would say, lastly, again, partnering. We're open to starting to say, okay, well, there's data sources, in other, from other domains and other players. And again, I think we need to bring those data sources together to again say, okay, where are the priority needs, and how do we go about getting a much better understanding of what those gaps are and what are those interrelated factors that are pertaining to the to some populations. So again, thank you.
And of course, that's a perfect segue into the second segment of our conversation, which is about that administrative data, about filling those data gaps and looking at how to use all of those rich sources to fill the spaces. Of course, I could talk about data gaps all day and twice on Sunday, but why don't we focus on your thoughts around some of that administrative data that the provinces and the other federal departments have, and how Statcam is planning on kind of making use of that going forward to enrich us all.
Yeah, thank you again. Administrative data sources are really vital. We give information to procure a particular service, and it leaves an administrative. Now, in many cases, whether they're education, whether they're justice records, or whether they're health records, or you name it. In many cases, those data sources reside in other levels of government, and not just within the federal government. And so, I understand that there are privacy issues and there are issues about access to the data. But I think we have some solutions in this country. We have had relationships on the justice side, for example, for 40 years now. On the education side for 25 years now. So we do have mechanisms by which we can govern the data in responsible ways. We're stepping up at Statistics Canada to bring in measures like proportionality and necessity, so that people can be assured that their data are being used in a very responsible and in a transparent way. So they should look at the Statistics Canada's Trust Center to get at what. So we get at it at the root cause of some of the issues of why some of those administrative data sources, why there might be people who are hesitant to sharing. We need to understand that sharing that data with an agency like Statistics Canada that has a very robust legal framework, it has a strong track record, I think assures us, that we can get at some of those unlocked, details that can understand or help us understand where we're going. So that's the first point. So administrative data and the ability to share it is really vital for us to understand what's going on, and it has to be done in a context where people feel comfortable that their privacy and businesses feel comfortable that their confidentiality is protected. In addition to that, just as I said earlier, matching data doesn't help. We know that in many cases, the basis on which it was collected, one is for the entire population, one might be for, only the adult population, one might be with the Indigenous, one might be without the Indigenous population. So we have to understand the characteristics of what those data sources are like before we just start to kind of, shovel them in together. And so we have to understand, cleanse it, and before we start linking data sets and saying this is what they're saying. So I think these are all the issues that are part of our modernization agenda. We've been doing it, as I said, it's not something that we don't know how to do, but I think it's changing our role as not just a collector of information and provider of information, but really we are we have to be more active in being a steward of various data sources, and that requires, I think, that that trust, and it requires the support of Canadians and governments working together at different levels, the private sector, the NGOs, institutes like yourself, to advocate for good use of data. We can, as I say, we can't. It's not a trade-off. Do you want more detail or do you want privacy? We have mechanisms where we can do both, and I think as soon as you start to get into these administrative data sources from, as I said, the private sector or other levels of government, we have to contend with those issues. But I think we need to also stand up and say, look, this is public good. There is no other intent other than to understand, what's going on and make sure that we're, making good policy. So last point I'll make here is that, we just got some resources to go deeper into disaggregated data. Some unprecedented investments in this agency, but money doesn't just kind of make data flow. Money is helpful, but that will has to be there. So that partnering, I think, is going to be really, really crucial. And we look forward to working with various levels of government in Northern Ontario, so that we can then in turn provide the kind of input and the kind of data and insights that are needed in our society today.
That's covering a lot of ground in a very short period of time. I think that'll bring an end to the first Q&A session. I think you've done a wonderful job, and I want to say thanks to the folks who submitted questions. We realize that certainly nowhere near all of your questions got answered. I understand that we'll try as collective to kind of get back to you after the fact with responses to questions that weren't responded to here. But in the meantime, Anil, you mentioned the word steward, and why don't you switch to the second portion of your remarks, kind of tell us a little bit about Statscam's role as a steward and how you are thinking of expanding that going forward.
Well, thanks again, Charles. Steward is a responsible, word in the sense that, we need to play a more proactive role in ensuring that standards are adhered to, that, we think about things like microdata that, are needed by researchers and academics and policymakers and businesses and associations and institutes such as this one to try and propel our understanding forward. And so, we're not going to be the monopoly or having all the data. The data reside in various, organizations and elements of society. And so it's a matter of playing that stewardship role of ensuring that data are used in responsible ways, in trustworthy ways, in ways that people can see what data are being used, how are they being used, and it's about also the infrastructure that underlies this. So it's not just a cavity that you just, or a database that one throws things in, but we have to go beyond that. We have to be able to increase numeracy and literacy so that people can see how best to provide information and the characteristics and the metadata associated with it, but even more so, on the responsible use of that information. I think organizations like ours have a role to play in building that capacity, working with different players, academia, to build that capacity. That's again part of that data stewardship role, and then it's to provide the tool sets and the abilities so that there's a way in which those that infrastructure can be used to bring different data, so put them together and responsibly come at the insights that are there. And that was really, I think, what our society is more and more looking for. So that user-centric nature is telling us that that's where we need to go. And we all have a role to play in that data stewardship. So hopefully, Charles, that gives you a little bit of a sense of where the future of Statistics Canada lies. It is team work. It is about integrating data sources, social, economic, and more environmental. It's about being able to, see sooner, therefore we can act faster. And it's about being responsible with concerns that people have, rightfully so, about their privacy and confidentiality. So happy to take any questions that you may have.
So we've extended our Q&A well into your second session, but it's interesting. We've covered many of the points that that I can cheat and see in your standard remarks. But one of the things that that you haven't actually covered in our Q&A, and what we'll do to handle time is we'll just keep the questions going for a few more minutes, and then we'll go into our third session, which is going to be my most favorite session, talking about the importance of responding to the census, right? But one of the things in your prepared remarks, you talked about virtual data labs. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you're seeing that as the way forward, or one of the ways forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think just a little bit of background. So now, more than 20 years ago, and I used to actually work in the dissemination division as an assistant director back then. We embarked on getting microdata, de-identified, anonymized data for research purposes to academia and researchers. And we started off with some longitudinal data sets, 5 or so. Started off with a handful of researchers and a couple of kind of physical locations. Well, today that robust research data network, collaboratively working with the Canadian Research Data Center Network, is proudly now it's 32 sites right across this country in various educational institutions. And we have over 800, and I think at last count 837 data sets within an environment that allows one to link data responsibly. We have close to 2,500 researchers that routinely use the data. But so that's the journey over 20 years. But that's not what this country needs going forward. It needs that and more. And so we have to get data to remote areas of our country. Many parts of Northern Ontario don't have access, to a research data center unless you get in a car and drive for hours and hours. And so the future is this virtual data lab. And what that means is that, for researchers and academics and institutes and policymakers who need access to that microdata, that you can do it securely in a remote fashion. And not just, what you could do, but it's about, as I was saying earlier, it's about having, services that are not only secure, but having the tool sets that allow you to be able to get at the insights that are locked within. So, so that's what the virtual data center and the virtual data lab is all about. So we are categorizing the sensitivity of all the microdata that we have. We are looking at things like a trusted model with researchers, so that they can, as they gain experience and they show that responsible nature, looking at the data, they have more access to even more data over time, and then they have the tools that are necessary. We want to get to crowdsourcing the expertise that our rich research community has right across this country, so that we can learn from their experience that carries over to the next and to the next and the next. So I think we need to look at research and microdata right at the inception of our programs, not as an afterthought or after the fact. So it's good. It's an exciting time. We're working with so many different organizations like Endrio and others to build that infrastructure, make sure that the data are there, and working with the academic and research community so that it's accessible. So of course, this pandemic, gave us some opportunities, to test that out, where in many cases due to health restrictions and advice of health officials, we had to shut down some of our research data centers. Of course, we have to move to virtual ways of doing things. So it's again accelerated, many of our efforts. So we have a number of pilot projects in place with a number of partners right across this country. We're learning so much from those experiences now, and I can't wait to expand that to the research community going forward. So that's a little bit on the virtual data lab, an exciting future. But again, it's going to take all of us working together to make something like that happen in this country.
Marvelous. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where you got that example of driving 12 hours that way or 8 hours that way to a regional data center. But hey, if it applies to somebody on this call, then there you have it. looking at some of the things we talked about in advance of coming online here, and one of the things you highlighted is Statcam has been gathering satellite and crop insurance data to reduce the time and effort farmers put into agricultural surveys. As you know, the farming sector, the agriculture sector in general, is I hesitate to use the word booming, but it's growing in Northern Ontario. There's lots of excitement. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about those kind of innovations and where you see that going on the agricultural side.
Yeah, thanks again. Obviously, very vibrant, sector, very important not only within Canada but also internationally as well. Many of our products obviously are in huge demand globally, and so we're a responsible provider of food and other packaged products and so on to the world. And so the agriculture sector, an important sector, first of all. Don't forget to fill out the census of agriculture as well, just as a little plug there. Really, really important, because we get a lot of the data on how the sector is changing, how that whole notion of demographics and how that people who are providing those essential services to us, how are they changing as well over time, in the sense of agriculture is an important instrument there. To your point, again, let me go back to sort of even pre-pandemic, and one of the pathfinders was really around, okay, how can we reduce burden on agricultural operators, on farmers? How can we actually partner with other sources of data? And how can we actually provide even more detail and even more timely resources? So just imagine all those things you might, in a conventional sense, you might think, well, these are trade-offs. You can't have it all. You can't be timely and provide more detail and reduce burden. Well, and frankly, that's that mind change that I was telling you about. And it's about saying, no. These are not opposites. These are not trade-offs. And so it's about innovation. And so we've been doing a number of hackathons where we bring problems, opportunities, data, experts together and say, well, look, how can we work on some of these things? And so this is another example of where we said, okay, how do we get the crop yields, data without imposing burden on very busy farmers? And so we partnered with insurance companies, that have really good records, and we use geospatial data and through the looking at those records, saying, okay, well, how can we get, the satellite resolutions now are pretty good, and we can get a pretty good sense of the yield. And as you know, when there's a drought, when there's a failure of some sort, insurance companies, get signals about, what's going on. So when you start to marry these sources of data in responsible ways, you get a really good sense, an accurate sense of crop yields and how they're shifting due to various climatic kind of incidents, in these countries. So we started the pilot, and believe it or not, we're well ahead of the game in terms of timeliness, and now we're providing crop yields data, without having to, burden a single response. And it's great for the insurance companies, because then they have, information at their fingertips. They don't need to go out and verify, all the time. So you can see the geospatial kind of aspects of things, so farmers get their money quicker. And obviously, the burden allows, the reduction in burden allows them to do what they do best, right? So these are kind of innovative examples of where you can use administrative data, not just as a passive source, but really as an active source, to help us move forward. And I think we're just at the start of examples like that. We have so many other examples that we're experimenting and working with. Again, in the agriculture space, we're working with the Data Governance Standards Collaborative, working with Standards Council of Canada, working with our colleagues in Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada, and trying to see about food security and how can we put standards in place, which give the Canadian agriculture sector a leg up when it comes to being more competitive and more efficient in the way we go about doing things. So I think data really is a really important commodity, and if used properly, used in a transparent way, building in the kind of measures that protect privacy and confidentiality, I think it can open up some really, really interesting opportunities into the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great position, and I know the folks from agriculture will be interested. before we switch over to our third and final topic, which is the census, you've mentioned the word partner several times today, and every time you have, there's 3 or 4 questions that appear on the screen. Clearly, the folks who are here with us are really excited about this concept of partnership. And Carrie Ann Campbell asked the question. She says, "Oh, I lost it. It went away on me." Anyway, I'll try and quote it, which was, if someone's interested in partnering with Statcam, if a new organization is interested in building a partnership, how do they go about doing it? Do they give you a call at your office, or is there a process to be followed?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, there are many entry points, and we'll welcome. You go on our website. There's a generic address. You can send an email to us, and we'll make sure that it gets to the right folks, and who will get back to you. We have data service centers across this country. They're operating virtually, so we receive calls and emails in those centers, and then we routinely follow up and say, okay, how can we be helpful in moving problem, opportunity, and solutions that are driven by data to move us forward. So so there's a 1-800 number on our website. There's an InfoStats website that you can use. That's probably the best way to make sure that we get your particular question routed to the right place. And then we will make sure that we follow up and pursue those opportunities. But it really depends, right? So if somebody is looking for some data on specific areas, then that's a fairly routine task, and we do hundreds, if not thousands, of them every month. And so we can help. That's a form of partnership. You've got a need, we've got the data. How can we make sure that we connect the thing? We put a lot of self-serve types of tools on our website. Databases and portals and hubs and various dashboards. So feel free to take a few minutes and look at our new website. There's a lot of information there that can sometimes be a bit overwhelming, but again, we're there to help. And then if we're talking about you're an entity and you have data, and you want to look at you got this data, but you're not really sure what's the inherent value within it, or how could it be even more valuable by working with Statistics Canada. Send us a little bit of the character of that opportunity, and we'll certainly follow up with you and say, okay, where can we take that opportunity or that problem. Now remember, we're the government, so we're not going to give exclusive kind of access, or so that we have to keep a level playing field. So just so you know, that's just the nature. These are public funds, and we want to make sure that we're equitable. So we're not going to get into any kind of exclusive kind of deals in that sense without going through proper procurement and opportunities. But other than that, there's tremendous possibility, and we literally have hundreds of partnerships in play right now, where we can bring data to solve real problems. And provide the kind of insights that really our society needs more and more today.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm really enjoying this free flow exchange between you and mine. I have to say that I suspect you're getting the same notes on the side of your computer that I'm getting on mine, which says "behave yourselves." But I guess it's time now. We've only got 30 minutes left. We should switch over to the last topic of the day, which is the centrality of the census and the importance of responding, and see if you've got some thoughts there that you wanted to offer to the attendees in terms of how that's been going.
Thanks, Charles. First of all, I don't know those notes that you're referring to, so they're
only sending them to me. How's that?
They're only to you. So you'll have to translate anything, in terms of advice on, how to be more responsive to the kind of concerns and questions that are coming through. So please feel free to give me the gist of that. But when it comes to the census, si vous me permettez, je peux peut-être faire quelques commentaires en français aussi.
Then I'll make a couple of comments also in French. Statistics Canada is never more prominent in Canadian society than it was in the census year, like this year. On May 11, we asked the Canadians to participate in a critically important national survey. Canadians has answered the call. In addition, the 2021 census engaged Canadians in a dialogue. This dialogue is also crucial. The data from Census 2021 will help all decision makers at all levels to plan our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Just as the data from Census 2016 and other Statistics Canada surveys helped them. It helped to respond to pandemic and including determining where and how to distribute vaccines per capita. Provincial, territorial, and federal government will use regional data from the 2021 census of population, including the data on age, income, housing, to determine who is most vulnerable to the current health and economic crisis. And to move on the next step, as we make our transition to recovery, also by matching census data, governments and businesses can better respond to societal trends and changes. For example, by evaluating transportation services, adapting community health services to meet neighborhood needs. The 2016 census found that more than half of the Northern Ontario residents live in a rural area, in rural area of less than 1,000 people, or in a small population centers where the population is less than 30,000 people. The 2021 census will give us a clearer picture of Northern demographics and its evolution. It will provide decision makers with the information they need to meet the specific needs of your communities. And with our increased focus on disaggregated data, the 2021 census will allow us to better understand the societal gaps highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The 2021 census is a key resource for obtaining disaggregated data on various population groups and for measuring trends over time. This includes the impact on the pandemic. For more disaggregated data, we're able to identify even more useful information. And this information will lead to a better understanding. The disaggregated data will allow us a more detailed study of Northern Ontario. We have now entered the follow-up phase of the census. We'll follow up on each dwelling for those for which we have not received a completed questionnaire. For some areas, including remote areas and the First Nations communities, well, maybe it will take us more time to get a complete picture. But we want to conduct the census safely and in a way that respects the real concerns of the communities. In-person visits only take place when there are no other options available. In those cases, the census officials will follow the safety protocols in accordance with the health authority guidelines, and they will not conduct any interviews inside of the residents' dwellings. We want everyone to be safe, and we want everyone to be counted. In 2016, our response rate was 98.4%. We expect a similar response data for 2021. Well, I'll turn to the questions with this to Charles. Thank you very much. Your questions.
Well, thanks for that. I think the big question that everybody has about the census is given it's a COVID year, how has census collection changed in the light of the pandemic? How is Statcam making sure that Canadians stay safe?
Yeah, I know a few people have said, what are you doing? It's a pandemic. Why are you collecting this information? And frankly, we remain very, very confident, and I think Canadians have demonstrated so far that we can, in fact, collect the census in a safe way. And so that's the first thing. And how do we do that? Well, we had to literally, at the beginning of the pandemic, not only change our ongoing surveys and how we do things, but we put a full-on effort in saying, okay, how do we adapt the census now to a COVID-19 context? And so, our very, very north communities in the country, in the territories, and some northern parts of the provinces, we essentially said, no, we're not going to go earlier than we normally do with an early enumeration. We're going to do that work at the same time as the census in May and June, and we're going to hire locally. We're not going to send people from different parts of the country because it doesn't make sense, right? And we don't want to risk the lives of either the communities and the members of the community, nor our staff. So so it's about local. How do we do it at the time that makes sense? And I think communities have responded saying, yeah, that's a very responsible way of doing things. The internet option is available to all now in this country for the first time. So everybody can do it securely online, in their pajamas, in their homes. So I think that's another huge improvement. And so far, close to 80% of Canadians have used the online option. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And so we know, when that happens, there's a confirmation code at the end of it. It's simple, it's done, and nobody comes in, has to do anything. Obviously, we're listening to, advice of health experts and following the various cautions that are in place. We've equipped all our interviewers and our field staff with PPEs and with sanitizers. They have all the procedures. Train them on how to go about doing the census in a way that's responsive and that protects their health as well as the health of Canadians. Nobody goes inside any dwellings. They'll keep at a healthy distance. They'll ask questions, and they'll be to help. They're there to help complete the questionnaire. As I mentioned earlier, in the Indigenous communities, a very respectful way of working with the local leadership there. We have a very robust Indigenous liaison program where we have members from communities that work with us, and they've been working with us, since the mid '80s in many cases. And so that relationship with Indigenous communities is a very respectful one, and we don't go, in there until the leadership is comfortable with us going. Again, it's local people, local communities, really implementing the census in a way that makes sense. So a lot of cautions, a lot of investments, some significant investments in resources, and even our call centers and so on. Our enumerators are working from their homes in safe environments, and so we've taken very, very I would say innovative and strong steps to make sure that we can provide the kind of data that is needed. I mean, think about it. What's happening right now is going to be a defining moment of where we're going to be in the future. And it just so happens that we're actually taking a picture of what's going on in this country at this very time. So labor market, immigration, housing situation, you name it. So I think this is going to be a very important benchmark, for us to say what was pre-COVID, what was during COVID, and then where do we go, from this time. So from a data and understanding and the insights perspective, the census is critical to understand, where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going from this point. So that's why I encourage everybody to take a few minutes, if you haven't already, and help us fill out the questionnaire. Make sure you get yourself into that census portrait. It's really, really important.
And of course, that leads perfectly into another question, which I'm sure you get all the time, which is, for those who might be a little, shall we say, reluctant to supply this kind of level of information and personal information, how do they know their personal information is secure?
Yeah, look, I understand some of those concerns. I mean, you just look around and you think about, privacy and breaches and some of the concerns. And so I can see some people, having some hesitation. But let me assure you, first of all, we've been doing the census in this country since 1666, and then since this country was officially formed, from 1871 onwards. So arguably, there's no other country that does a better census, and each census we learn from the past one, and we put in more measures, and we make it a stronger, census that protects, privacy. So many years ago, we used to have local people collecting information locally. People said, no, I don't want my information to be floating around, within the community. I want it to, go to Ottawa. Well, we mail back using Canada Post as one of our, amazing partners. And now that information, comes to us. Then we put the secure online, encrypted and, investments in doing that back in the 2000s. And, Canadians have responded like no other country, I would say, in filling it out online, 80% so far for this census, and we expect that to continue to grow. So again, investments that protect the privacy and the confidentiality of the information. The law, Statistics Canada. Yes, people say, is it legally required, to fill out the census? Yes, it is a legal requirement in this country because it's really important. And as you know, we even have, mechanisms in which to reduce that burden. So it's only 1 in 4 dwellings that, has to do the long form. Half an hour worth of work, once every 5 years, short form, 5 minutes kind of thing. Tried to make it fun. We put some playlists on Spotify so you can listen to some songs while you fill out the secure online questionnaire. But the law that obligates one to fill the form out equally, obligates us at Statistics Canada to keep that information confidential. Nobody will see that information. As soon as it comes in, it gets anonymized, and then it, goes through subsequent, processing steps, because it's the statistics that we're interested in. Yes, 92 years from now, when you fill it out, there is a requirement for genealogical and research purposes where that information will be made available. But other than that, it's in a vault and nobody's going to see it. And so that information remains confidential, and it's protected by law with severe criminal penalties, for doing that. So not only are we the best at doing this in the world, but we also have a very robust mechanism to do it. And the last point I'll make there is, this really matters. It matters to your community, not only in terms of the amount of monies that get transferred from different levels of government. It matters as a democratic society. The number of seats in the House of Commons, for example, and many other levels of government use the population, counts and so on. Umpteen policies, that are built on the census data, from transportation to, healthcare to, how often that bus, comes. The census data is, immigration and the types of skills, labor markets, and, how training programs should be devoted. How, our overall societal fabric is changing with socioeconomic. There was a question earlier about, minority language rates, Indigenous languages and Indigenous people, and how, societies are changing. There isn't a part of your day, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, whether you're not making decisions subconsciously or consciously, based on something that is really the hallmark of this country, and that's that information base. And the majority of that information on which people make decisions comes from this particular instrument. So if you leave yourself out, then you really are leaving, that portrait, unfilled, and that's an important gap that you are leaving. So take the time, ask questions, ask us about the privacy and the confidentiality if you still have concerns about it, and we will tell you exactly the extent and the level to which we go to protect your information. But it's really important that you count yourself in.
Marvelous. So, last question of the afternoon: when do all the data folks who are on this meeting, and all the folks sitting out there in the community waiting, when do we start seeing the results from 2021? And if you have a few sneak peeks of some of the tools that you might be introducing at the same time you're releasing data, that'd be lovely to hear as well.
Aha, the pièce de résistance, as you say. Yes, indeed. Of course, we collect this information to make sure that it's available, and that people, every community, every citizen, every business, every decision maker, every institute, has every researcher has that information at their fingerprints. So the census results are, eagerly anticipated. As I mentioned, we're sitting at just over 80% in terms of completion. So of course, the next couple of months we'll still continue to work to making sure that we get at that very high response rate of nearing 100%. There's a number of additional studies that happen in parallel, like dwelling classifications, and then we do a coverage study after that to unduplicate and get at what the gaps are and fill them. So that goes on into the fall, and then the response database within Statistics Canada starts to take shape. And believe it or not, other than a very, very small period at Christmas and New Year's, there literally like people are working day and night to get that information. The first release in February on the population counts, and then right after that, then we come up with additional products. So there's geographical products. There's information about how to you look at that information and position it right, and then into the summer, into the fall, come out the kind of rich data sets and the kind of tools that go along with those data sets, so that every aspect, if you like, of the information that's collected on the census is then made available through a series of releases. There's a whole series of customized products as well that are created in addition to the formal releases, and they're all made available as we go, from microdata sets and so on, as we go over the course of the next couple of years. So it really is from the time that we had Census Day, May the 11th, it literally within 18 months of that time, we put out a tremendous amount of information, whether it's updating our demographic profile, whether it's a linguistic profile, whether it's the socioeconomic information, whether it's housing, whether it's Indigenous, whether it's jobs and skills and so on, transportation patterns, immigration patterns. All that information comes out literally within a few months of completion of this massive data collection exercise. And then in between all that, we have a number of obligations. So for example, the redistricting commission that needs that input for the next determination of boundaries for electoral districts and so on. So in between all that, we also have to provide information to other policy departments, and so it's a full-on all out. And with every one of those releases, we work with the media, we work with partners to make sure not only that the data is out there, but it's in easy to consume tools with the kind of infographics, with the kind of databases and the interfaces that allow for it to be consumed in responsible ways. In a sense, it nourishes so many databases right across this country, and it gives them that rich picture of what was happening at this time in 2021.
Exactly. On that note, we've come to the end of our time together, and so I do want to thank you, Anil, personally, for taking the time to answer the questions, to give us a sense of what Statcam is up to, and to do it in a very approachable way, in plain language, not too many statistical accuracies and numerical formulas jumped into your language. So we all appreciate that. I want to thank your team. It's been great working with them, and they've been a huge resource in terms of making this event happen. And of course, I want to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of their afternoon to send those questions in, to think about these issues, and to reach out. There's several kind of proposals for partnerships, both with us and with Statcam, which I'm pretty excited about. So I think most of that wouldn't have happened. Many of that wouldn't have happened without your generous offer to participate in this, Anil. And so thank you again on behalf of everybody who's here, and thank your team. And on that note, I'll leave the final words to you, sir.
Well, thank you. No formulae were harmed or killed in this process, which is always good. No, but seriously, Charles, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for Northern Policy Institute for the work that you do. Thank you for the partnership. I also equally am so grateful for the folks at Statistics Canada that work so hard to make events like this happen, and I know they work with you and your team to facilitate this. We have only one purpose, and that is to make sure that you and your audience is equipped with the kind of data that is so important today to make good evidence-based and factual decisions in a timely way, because our society and our communities depend on it. And Statistics Canada takes its role very, very seriously. And we want to make sure that we're responsive and relevant to your collective needs. May not be able to do everything all at once and satisfy everybody's needs. I think most people understand that we have to make some priorities, but they understand that we will do whatever's necessary to help. And we're not above innovating and trying and even taking the odd risks. May not always work out, but we're not afraid to try it and be more helpful. So thank you to your audience. Thank you to the vibrant communities in Northern Ontario, a place that I have frequented many times, and I've loved every visit. So I know how hardy the individuals are there, and so I wish you all the best. I wish you good health as we come out of this pandemic, and know that Statistics Canada and our colleagues here are here to help you. So thank you for your questions, and thank you for participating in today's event.
Take care, everybody. Thank you again for participating.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.